They're coming!
They're coming!
The rancher gave his last horse to 2 Apache sisters. At dawn, their father arrived with 200 warriors. The common belief was that a man with nothing left wouldn't give away his last chance at survival. It just didn't make sense. Yet, when Hollis Vane led that horse out of his barn as the sun set, his torn shirt covered in dirt and exhaustion etched into his face, he didn't appear to be making a rational decision. He seemed like someone who had already accepted his fate. The 2 young women standing at the edge of his property shouldn't have been there. One leaned heavily on the other, blood staining the fabric around her leg a dark color. They remained silent. They didn't plead. They simply watched him with eyes that expected nothing, as if they had learned long ago that hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. Hollis had spent 3 months alone on that failing ranch. 3 months since the drought destroyed his crops. 3 months since he had spoken to another living soul. And during all that time, the one thing he protected, the one thing he kept alive, was that horse, his last valuable possession, his only way out. However, something about the silence between those sisters broke something within him. Or perhaps it fixed something that had been broken for much longer. He gave them the horse. No words, no explanations. He just unfastened the reins and held him out. The older sister stared at him as if he'd handed her a loaded gun. The younger one's eyes widened. Confusion mixed with something akin to fear. This wasn't how the world was supposed to work. Men like him didn't do things like this. Not for people like them. But Hollis simply nodded toward the horizon where the last light was fading and stepped back. They took the horse, and they vanished into the approaching darkness. What Hollis didn't realize, what he couldn't have known, was that someone had been watching from the ridge above. Someone who had seen everything. Someone who would carry that image back to a camp where 200 warriors awaited news. And when dawn broke the next morning, the horizon had transformed. It was filled with shapes, dozens of them, then hundreds, moving as one, heading straight toward the ranch. Hollis stood in his doorway, watching them approach, and he realized that he'd made a choice that couldn't be undone. Whatever was coming next was already set in motion. The question wasn't whether they would reach him. It was why they were coming and what they would do once they arrived. Hollis didn't move from the doorway. His hands hung loosely at his sides, fingers trembling slightly. The rifle leaned against the frame behind him, within reach but untouched. He had known this moment would come. A part of him had always known it, ever since he'd handed over those reins. The shapes on the horizon grew larger, taking form. Riders, too many to count. They moved in formation, disciplined and deliberate, the sound reaching before he could distinguish individual faces. The thunder of hooves against the hard earth, rhythmic and relentless. His throat tightened. 3 months of isolation, and now this. He considered running, but there was nowhere to go. The ranch stretched out behind him, with broken fences and dying land. The barn where the horse had been stood empty, its door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. He'd given them his only means of escape. Hollis pressed his palms against the doorframe, steadying himself. The sun climbed higher, harsh and unforgiving, casting long shadows across the property. Dust rose from the approaching riders like smoke, obscuring details. He squinted, tried to see if the younger sister had survived the night, if they had made it to their destination, or if something worse had happened, something that had brought this army to his doorstep. The question swirled in his gut, mixing with something else. Not quite regret, but more like resignation. He had made a choice, and whatever followed was the price of that choice. The riders slowed as they reached the outer edge of his land. The formation shifted, spreading wider. Hollis counted 20, then 50, then stopped counting. They encircled the property, moving with precision, not like a raid or a chaotic attack. This was something organized. His chest tightened. Organized meant intentional. They had come here specifically for him. One rider broke away from the formation, moving ahead of the others. The figure sat tall, wrapped in leathern fabric that caught the wind. Behind them, the mass of warriors held their position, waiting. Hollis's heart hammered against his ribs. He forced himself to breathe, in through his nose and out through his mouth. His father's voice echoed from somewhere deep inside him. Panic gets you killed, boy. Stay present. But staying present meant facing what was coming. The lone rider approached the fence line and stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. The warrior remained mounted, perfectly still. Then, slowly they dismounted. Hollis felt his muscles tense up. Every instinct screamed at him to reach for the rifle. Instead, he stepped out from the doorway, moving into the open where he could be seen clearly. If this was the end, he wouldn't face a hiding. The warrior walked forward, crossing into the yard. The sun caught the side of their face, and Hollis's breath caught in his throat. It was the older sister, Yazi. She moved differently now. The exhaustion that had weighed her down the night before was gone, replaced by something harder. She walked like someone who belonged exactly where she was. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They weren't filled with gratitude, nor were they soft with relief. They were measuring him, calculating, weighing something he couldn't name. She stopped 15 feet away, close enough to speak, but far enough to remain cautious. Hollis waited, his throat feeling like sandpaper. Yazzie didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She just stood there, studying him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Behind her, the massive warriors remained motionless, watching. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying across the space between them. He wants to see you. Not a request, but a statement. Hollis swallowed hard. Who? Yazzie's expression didn't change. The one you gave the horse to. He's her father. You took something from him without asking. Now he'll decide what that means. The words landed like stones in his chest. Behind Yazzie, the formation parted. A single rider emerged from the center, moving forward with deliberate slowness. The figure was broader than the others, commanding respect. Even from a distance, Hollis could feel the weight of authority radiating from him. Yazzie turned slightly, gesturing toward the approaching rider. That's Koana, and you're about to learn what happens when you interfere with his family. Koana moved like water across stone, smooth, inevitable, unstoppable. His horse stepped carefully, its hooves striking the hard ground in a measured rhythm. As he drew closer, details emerged that made Hollis's pulse quicken. The man was older than he'd expected. Gray streaked through the black hair that fell past his shoulders. Scars marked his arms, visible even from a distance, lines that told stories of survival. But it was his face that held Hollis frozen, weathered hard and completely unreadable. Hollis forced himself to stand straight. His legs felt weak, but he locked his knees. Running wasn't an option, and begging wouldn't help. Whatever judgment was coming, he would face it standing. Koana stopped 20 feet away and dismounted in one fluid motion. He landed without a sound, feet planted wide. For several seconds, he simply looked at Hollis. Not with anger, not with curiosity, but with something closer to assessment, like a man examining an object whose purpose he didn't yet understand. Hollis's mouth went dry. He wanted to speak, to explain, but the words caught his throat. What could he possibly say? That he'd felt sorry for them? That he couldn't stand by and watch? That something in him had broken when he saw that younger sister bleeding? None of it would matter. Not to a father who had just learned that a stranger had touched his family's fate. Koana walked forward, each step deliberate. He stopped within arm's reach, close enough that Hollis could see the deep lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw, and the way his breathing remained perfectly controlled. Up close, the man was even more imposing, taller than Hollis by a couple of inches and broader to the shoulders. Everything about him spoke of a strength that came from decades of necessity, not choice. You gave him the horse. Kohana's voice was low, graveled, but clear. He spoke English with careful precision. Hollis nodded. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Yes. Why? The question landed like a challenge. Hollis felt the weight of 200 warriors watching from behind Koana. One wrong word, one perceived insult. And this would end badly. But lying felt worse than dying. They needed it more than I did. Kohana's eyes narrowed. You knew who they were? No. You knew what giving away your last animal meant. Hollis's jaw tightened. Yes. And you did it anyway. It wasn't a question. Hollis said nothing. Koana took another step forward, closing the distance until they were almost chest to chest. This close, Hollis could see the faint tremor in the older man's hands. Not from fear or weakness, but from something restrained, something held tightly under control. My daughter told me what you did. Nijoni, the younger one. She would have died without that horse. They were being hunted. 3 men following them since dawn. If they'd been caught on foot, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Hollis felt something shift in his chest. Is she all right? Kohana's expression flickered, just for a moment. Something like surprise crossed his features. Then it was gone, replaced by that same unreadable mask. She's alive because of you. The words should have brought relief, but instead, they hung in the air like an unfinished sentence. Koana turned slightly, glancing back toward the warriors. Then he looked at Hollis again. This time, there was something different in his gaze, something that made Hollis's stomach drop. 3 men were tracking my daughters. They were found this morning, half a day's ride from here. Hollis waited, tension coiling in his gut. They'd been asking about a rancher, a white man living alone. They wanted to know if he'd seen 2 Apache women. They were going to come here next. The implication hit Hollis like a fist. Those men had been headed to his ranch, looking for the sisters. If Hollis had kept the horse, if he'd sent the women away on foot, They would have been caught, and he would have been questioned, maybe worse. You didn't just save my daughters, Koana said quietly. You made yourself a target. Behind him, the warriors shifted, not threateningly, but with anticipation. Koana stepped back, creating space. His hand moved to his side, and Hollis's entire body went rigid. But Koana didn't draw a weapon. Instead, he reached into the leather pouch of his belt and pulled something out, a piece of worn fabric. No, a strip of leather, braided and old, with markings Hollis didn't recognize. Koana held it out. You'll need to come with us. Hollis stared at the offered item, his mind racing. Come with you where? Kohana's expression remained unchanged. Those men had friends. More are coming. They know you helped my daughters. If you stay here, you won't survive the week. The weight of that statement settled over Hollis like frost. And if I go with you? His voice barely rose above a whisper. Kohana's eyes locked onto his. Then you live long enough to understand what you've done. Hollis had nothing packed. The few belongings he owned, a spare shirt, a tin cup, a blanket worn thin, fit into a canvas sack that hung light against his shoulder. He took one last look at the ranch, at the structure that had been his home for 5 years, and felt nothing. The drought had killed it long before today. 2 warriors flanked him as they rode. Not exactly as guards, but not as companions either. They watched him with the same careful attention someone might give a wolf brought into camp, uncertain whether it would bite or bow. The journey took most of the day. They moved through terrain Hollis knew from a distance, but had never crossed on foot or on horseback. Rocky passages that required careful navigation, dry riverbeds where the earth cracked like old leather. The landscape stretched endless and unforgiving, offering no shade and no mercy. No one spoke. The silence pressed against him, heavier than the heat. Hollis kept his eyes forward, trying to read the situation. The warriors moved with practiced efficiency, each one alert but not tense. This wasn't a war party. This was an escort. But for what? As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land, they crested a rise. Below, nestled against the canyon wall, lay the encampment. Dozens of shelters constructed from hide and wood, arranged in a careful formation. Smoke rose from several fires. Children ran between structures, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. Women worked near the flames, preparing food, tending to the tasks that kept communities alive. It looked nothing like what Hollis had imagined. This wasn't a war camp. This was a home. They descended into the camp, and all activity paused. Faces turned toward them, their expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. A few elders stood near the central fire, watching with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. Koana dismounted first. He spoke in his own language, his words flowing with authority. Some of the tension in the watching faces eased, but not all of it. Hollis could feel the weight of their judgment, the questions being asked without words. Who is this outsider? Why is he here? What has he done? Yaji appeared from one of the larger shelters, moving quickly to Kohana's side. She spoke quietly, gesturing toward a smaller structure at the edge of the camp. Koana nodded, then turned to Hollis. You'll stay there tonight. Food will be brought. Don't wander. It wasn't suggestion. Hollis followed where Yaji led, acutely aware of the eyes tracking his movements. The shelter was modest, barely tall enough to stand in, with a single opening covered by hide. Inside, a bedroll lay on the ground, along with a water skin and a small pile of dried meat. Yaji stopped at the entrance, the first time she'd done so since they'd left his ranch. She looked at him directly. My sister wants to see you. Hollis's chest tightened. Is she? She's recovering. The wound was deep but clean. She'll walk again. Yaji's expression remained guarded. She doesn't understand why you did it. None of us do. Hollis had no answer to that. He barely understood himself. Yaji studied him for another moment, then spoke again, her voice lower. The men who were tracking us, they weren't random hunters. They work for someone who has reason to want our father's family dead. The words settled like ice in Hollis's gut. Who? We don't know yet, but they're organized, well-funded, and they won't stop just because 3 of their men disappeared. She paused. By helping us, you put yourself in their path. That's why father brought you here. If you'd stayed at that ranch, they would have found you, and they would have made you talk before they killed you. Hollis felt his hands curl into fists. I didn't ask for protection. No, you didn't ask for anything. That's why you're still breathing. Yaji's gaze hardened. My father has seen many white men. Most want land. Some want gold. Others want to prove something. But you? She shook her head slightly. You gave away the one thing keeping you alive, and you asked for nothing in return. That confuses him. And what confuses your father, he studies. Before Hollis could respond, A commotion erupted near the camp's perimeter. Voices were raised in alarm. Warriors moved with sudden urgency, grabbing weapons, forming defensive positions. Yaji spun toward the sound, her body tensing. Stay here. She sprinted toward the disturbance, leaving Hollis alone at the shelter's entrance. Through the gaps between structures, he could see warriors gathering at the camp's edge. Someone was shouting, the words indistinct but urgent. Koana strode toward the group, his presence commanding immediate attention. Hollis stepped forward despite the order to stay. His pulse hammered at his ears. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the sudden shift of energy, the way even the children had gone silent. A warrior ran into camp, breathing hard. His clothes were torn. Dust and sweat covered his skin. He spoke rapidly to Koana, gesturing toward the horizon. Kohana's expression darkened. He barked orders, and the camp exploded into controlled chaos. Warriors mounted horses. Elders ushered children into shelters. Women gathered weapons of their own. Hollis caught Yazi as she rushed past. What's happening? She jerked her arm free, her eyes blazing. They found us, a group of riders, maybe 20, heading this way. His stomach dropped. The men hunting your family? Worse. She looked at him with something close to accusation. They're not just hunting us anymore. They're asking about a rancher, a white man who helped 2 Apache women escape. The implication crashed over him like a wave. They weren't just coming for Kohana's family. They were coming for him, too. Koana didn't waste time with explanations. He moved through the camp, issuing commands, his voice cutting through the rising tension like a blade through fabric. Warriors responded instantly, forming defensive positions along the canyon's edge. Archers took elevated positions. Others created barriers using whatever materials were available. Carts, supply bundles, even saddles stacked strategically. Hollis stood near his assigned shelter, feeling both useless and helpless. He wasn't one of them. He had no place in their defense. But standing idle while people who had offered him protection faced danger felt wrong on a level he couldn't articulate. Yaji reappeared, moving with purpose. She thrust a rifle into his hands, his own, taken from the ranch. If you know how to use it, use it. If you don't, stay out of the way. Hollis checked the chamber. It was still loaded. He looked at her. I'm not hiding while others fight because of me. Something flickered in her expression. Not quite respect, but acknowledgement. Then stay close to Father. He'll tell you where to position yourself. She moved away before he could respond. Hollis found Koana near the center of the defensive formation, speaking with 3 older warriors. Maps drawn in the dirt showed the canyon's layout, escape routes, vulnerable points. Koana looked up as Hollis approached, his gaze sharp and assessing. You know how to shoot? Well enough. Koana gestured to a position behind a natural rock formation that offered both cover and a clear sight line toward the camp's entrance. There. Don't fire unless I give the order. We don't know what they want yet. Hollis moved into position, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sun had nearly set, painting everything in shades of orange and shadow. In the fading light, the approaching riders became visible, dark shapes cresting the ridge above the canyon. 20, just as the scout had reported, maybe more behind them. They rode in formation, confident and unhurried. These weren't random drifters or opportunistic thieves. This group moved with military precision. Koana stepped forward, standing in open ground where he could be clearly seen. He held no weapon. His hands remained at his sides, his posture straight and unyielding. The message was clear. He wasn't backing down, but he wasn't attacking first either. The riders descended into the canyon, spreading into a loose semicircle that cut off the main exit. Their leader dismounted, a tall man with a beard going gray, dressed in worn leather, and carrying himself like someone accustomed to authority. 2 others flanked him, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. The bearded man spoke, his voice carrying across the space. We're looking for 2 women, Apache, young, one injured. We have reason to believe they came through here. Kohana's expression remained impassive. Many people come through here. These 2 were helped by a rancher, a white man living alone north of here. We need to speak with him, too. From his position behind the rocks, Hollis felt his blood run cold. They weren't even pretending this was about something else. They had connected him to the sisters. They knew exactly what had happened. Koana didn't move. Why do you seek them? The bearded man's jaw tightened. That's between us and them. No concern of yours. Everything that happens on this land is my concern. Kohana's voice remained level, but something dangerous edged beneath it. You ride into my camp, armed, making demands. That makes it my concern. The tension thickened. Hollis watched the other riders shift in their saddles, their hands moving closer to their weapons. This was a breath away from violence. The bearded man took a step forward. "We don't want trouble with you. Give us what we came for and we'll leave peacefully. And if I refuse?" The question hung in the air like smoke. The bearded man's expression hardened. "Then we'll take what we came for, one way or another." Behind the rocks, Hollis's finger moved the trigger. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to stay hidden, to let Koana handle this. But the truth was suffocating. These men were here because of him, because he had made a choice that pulled others into danger. Before he could second-guess himself, Hollis stood. He stepped out from behind the cover, rifle held loosely but ready, and walked toward Kohana's position. Every eye turned to him. The bearded man's expression shifted from annoyance to recognition. "That's him, the rancher." Hollis stopped beside Koana, close enough to show solidarity, but not so close that he would crowd the older man's authority. He looked directly at the bearded man. "I'm here. Let's talk." Koana didn't look at him, but his voice was quiet, meant only for Hollis. "This isn't your fight." Hollis kept his eyes on the strangers. "You said I made myself a target. Seems like the target should face what's coming." For a moment, nothing moved. The canyon held its breath. Then the bearded man smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Brave. Stupid, but brave. He gestured to his men. "Bring him." Two riders spurred their horses forward, closing the distance fast. Koana moved so quickly that Hollis barely saw it. One moment, he was standing still. The next, he had positioned himself between Hollis and the approaching riders, his hand raised in a gesture that stopped them cold. "No one takes anyone from my camp without my permission." The bearded man's smile faded. "You're protecting him, a white man, after what his kind has done to yours?" Kohana's voice dropped to something colder than Hollis had heard yet. "He gave my daughters his last horse. That makes him kin. And no one touches my kin." The words landed like thunder. The bearded man's expression darkened. His hand moved toward his weapon, and everything exploded. The first shot cracked through the canyon like breaking bone. Hollis dropped to the ground on instinct, dirt exploding inches from where he had stood. Koana moved with him, both hitting cover behind a supply cart as chaos erupted around them. Apache warriors returned fire from elevated positions, their aim precise and devastating. 3 of the bearded man's riders fell in the first volley. The others scattered, seeking whatever shelter the canyon offered. Horses screamed and bolted. Dust rose in choking clouds. Hollis presses back against the cart, breathing hard. His rifle felt heavy in his hands. Beside him, Koana remained perfectly calm, assessing the battlefield with the practiced eye of someone who had survived too many fights to panic during one more. "How many rounds do you have?" Kohana's voice cut through the noise. Hollis checked. 12. "Make them count." A rider charged toward their position, weapon raised. Hollis aimed, steadied his breathing, and fired. The man lurched backward, tumbling off his saddle. The horse kept running, disappearing into the smoky haze in a confused panic. Hollis's hand trembled slightly. He'd hunted his whole life, mostly small game. He once took down a bear that was threatening livestock, but he'd never shot at a person before. The weight of it settled in his chest, heavy as a stone. "Focus," he told himself. Kohana's voice snapped him back to the present moment. "Regret can wait. Survive now." 2 more riders burst from cover, trying to outflank their position. Apache warriors intercepted them before they could get close. The clash quickly turned into brutal, efficient hand-to-hand combat that was over in seconds. The bearded man was nowhere to be seen. Hollis scanned the chaotic scene, trying to spot the leader. If they could take him down, maybe the others would retreat. Maybe this could all end without any more bloodshed. A figure moved near the edge of the camp, creeping toward where the women and children had taken shelter. It wasn't the bearded man, but one of his lieutenants, a younger guy with a scar running down his cheek. He was carrying a knife, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who'd been trained to kill quietly. Hollis felt his stomach drop. He was heading straight for the shelters. Koana saw it instantly and whistled, a sharp, distinct sound that cut through the noise. 2 warriors broke away from their positions, moving to intercept, but the scarred man was closer. He reached the shelters first. Hollis didn't think. He just reacted. He bolted from cover, running low and fast. His boots hammered against the hard earth. The distance closed in what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than a few seconds. The scarred man reached the shelter's entrance, reaching for the hide covering. Hollis slammed into him like a battering ram. They crashed to the ground together, rolling in the dirt. The knife flew from the man's grip, landing several feet away. Hollis scrambled for it, but the scarred man recovered faster than he expected. A fist connected with Hollis's jaw, snapping his head back. Stars exploded across his vision. They grappled in the dirt, neither able to gain an advantage. The scarred man was younger and faster, but Hollis had worked a ranch for years. His strength came from necessity, from hauling water, mending fences, and doing whatever the land demanded. He locked his arms around the man's torso and squeezed until he felt ribs begin to strain. The scarred man gasped, struggling to break free. Hollis held on, pouring everything he had into maintaining his grip. His muscles burned, his vision blurred, but he didn't let go. Yaji appeared above them, weapon in hand. She didn't hesitate. One precise strike, and the scarred man went limp. Hollis released him, gasping for air. His whole body ached. Yaji offered her hand, pulling him to his feet. You're either very brave or very stupid. Both, probably. Hollis retrieved his rifle, checking to make sure it hadn't been damaged in the struggle. The fighting had mostly stopped. Bodies lay scattered across the camp, more the attackers and defenders, but the cause was still evident. Wounded warriors were being tended to. The remaining attackers had retreated beyond the canyon's edge, regrouping. Nahal strode toward them, his expression grim. They'll come back. This was just the first attempt. Hollis wiped blood from his split lip. Who are they? Why are they so determined? Before Nahal could answer, a voice called out from beyond the camp's perimeter. The bearded man was still alive, still in command. Nahal, we need to talk. Nahal's jaw tightened. He moved toward the voice, and Hollis followed despite every instinct screaming at him to stay behind cover. The bearded man stood at the edge of rifle range, hands raised but weapons still holstered. His remaining men flanked him, fewer now, but still dangerous. You've made your point, the bearded man called out. But this doesn't end here. You know that. Nahal's voice carried across the distance, cold and clear. Then tell me why. Why hunt my daughters? Why track this rancher? Who sent you? The bearded man's expression twisted into something that looked almost like pity. You really don't know, do you? Your daughters saw something they shouldn't have. Something that powerful men want buried. And the rancher, he gestured toward Hollis. He became a witness the moment he helped them. Hollis felt ice spread through his veins. What did they see? The bearded man smiled, but there was no humor in it. Ask them if they'll tell you, but know this. We're not the only ones looking. And the next group that comes won't be as forgiving. He turned to mount his horse, then paused, looking back. You bought yourself some time today. Use it wisely. Figure out what you're really protecting. Because once you know the truth, you might wish you'd handed them over. The remaining riders disappeared into gathering darkness, leaving only dust and the promise of future violence. Nahal stood motionless, staring after them. Then he turned to Hollis, and in his eyes was something Hollis hadn't seen before. Fear. Nahal didn't speak as they returned to the center of camp. The wounded were being treated, the bodies of the fallen covered with blankets. The air smelled of gunpowder and blood. Children peeked out from the shelters, their eyes wide with the kind of fear that would take years to fade. Hollis watched Nahal's face as they walked. The man who'd stood so confidently against 20 armed riders now carried tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that spoke of deeper worry than the fight itself. They stopped outside the larger shelter where Yaji had emerged earlier. Nahal turned to Hollis, and when he spoke, his voice was low enough that only they could hear. What I'm about to show you changes everything. Once you know, there's no going back to your ranch. No pretending you're just a man who helped some strangers. You understand? Hollis met his gaze. I think I passed that point when I gave him the horse. Something that might have been respect flickered across Nahal's features. He pulled back the hide covering and gestured inside. The shelter's interior was dimly lit by a single lamp. Nijoni lay on a bedroll, her injured leg elevated and bandaged. She looked pale but alert, her dark eyes tracking them as they entered. Yaji sat beside her sister, one hand resting protectively on Nijoni's shoulder. Nahal knelt near his daughters, his presence filling the small space. Tell him what you saw. Yaji's jaw tightened. Father, he needs to know. He's risked his life. He's earned the truth. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Nijoni shifted, wincing at the movement. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than Hollis expected, but steady. We were hunting 3 days north of here, near the canyon where the old trading post used to stand. She paused, gathering strength. We heard voices, men's voices, so we stayed hidden and watched on the ridge above. Hollis waited, tension building in his chest. There were 5 of them, Nijoni continued. Well-dressed, not ranchers or trappers. They looked like government men, official. They were meeting with someone, a man in expensive clothes who arrived with 2 guards. Yaji picked up the story, her voice harder. They were negotiating. The government men wanted land, a specific piece of territory that belongs to several tribes, including ours, sacred ground, burial sites. The expensive man was offering to help them take it for a price. Hollis felt his stomach turn. How? By making it look like we violated treaty terms, Yaji explained, staging attacks, blaming our people, giving them justification to move us off the land. Yaji's hands curled into fists. They discussed it openly. How many would need to die to make it convincing which settlements to hit first? The implications crashed over Hollis like a wave. Land seizure wasn't new. He'd heard stories, seen families displaced, watched as promises got broken with bureaucratic efficiency. But this was different. This was premeditated, organized murder disguised as policy. They saw you. Hollis looked at Nijoni. She nodded. One of the guards. He spotted us on the ridge. We ran. They followed. We've been running ever since. Nahal's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. If they succeed, dozens of families will be forced from land we've held for generations. If we resist, they'll have justification for violence. If we comply, we lose everything anyway. Hollis's mind raced. But if you have witnesses, if Nijoni and Yaji can testify to what they heard, who would believe them? Yaji's voice was sharp. 2 Apache women against government officials and wealthy businessmen? In what court would that testimony matter? The question hung heavy, because they all knew the answer. None. Nahal stood, his frame blocking most of the lamplight. This is why they hunt so relentlessly. This is why more will come. Those men can't afford to leave any witnesses. And now you're a witness too. You sheltered them. You helped them escape. That makes you dangerous to their plans. Hollis felt the full weight of his choice settling on his shoulders. He'd known giving the horse was risky, but he hadn't known it would pull him into something this large, this organized, this deadly. So what do we do? His voice came out rougher than he intended. Nahal studied him for a long moment. You've already done more than anyone had a right to expect. You could leave, disappear, change your name, start somewhere else. Hollis thought about his ranch. Already dead. His life there already over. He thought about the moment he'd seen those 2 sisters, exhausted, bleeding, expecting nothing, and how something in him had broken at the sight. No, he said quietly. I gave them the horse. That makes them kin, right? That's what you told those riders. Nahal's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. You understand what that means? You're choosing this fight. Choosing to stand against people with resources and authority, and the willingness to kill anyone who threatens them. Hollis met his gaze steadily. I'm choosing not to run from people who want to murder families, so they can steal land. Seems like a pretty clear choice to me. For the first time since they'd met, Nahal smiled. It was brief, barely visible in the dim light, but genuine. Then we plan, because running won't save anyone. But the truth, properly delivered to the right people, might. Yaji looked between them. Father, even if we find someone to listen, those men will come for us before we can reach anyone who matters. Nahal's smile faded. I know. That's why we need to move tonight. Before they regroup, before they bring more men. Hollis's pulse quickened. Move where? Nahal turned to face him fully. There's a federal marshal 2 days' ride from here. He's one of the few officials I've met who actually honors his word. If we can reach him, tell him what my daughter's witnessed. Show him the evidence. What evidence? Hollis interrupted. Nijoni reached beneath her bedroll and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and stained, but intact. I grabbed this from expensive man's saddlebag while they were distracted searching for us. She handed it to Hollis. He unfolded it carefully, holding it toward the lamp. It was a contract, detailed, specific, outlining payments, timelines, and methods for removing Native families from designated territories. There were signatures at the bottom, official seals, government stamps, names Hollis didn't recognize, but which clearly held authority. His hands shook as he read. This wasn't speculation. This was proof. They'll kill everyone in this camp to get this back, Hollis said quietly. Nahal nodded. Yes, which is why we leave in 1 hour. Small group, fast. You meet my daughters and 2 warriors I trust with my life. Everyone else scatters, hides, makes it impossible to track where we've gone. Nahal's voice was firm. It's the only way we get this evidence to the marshal, or everyone dies anyway. Hollis looked at the contract again, at the signatures that condemned people to death for profit. He thought about his empty ranch, his dead life, the choice he'd made that led to this moment. 1 hour, he agreed. Outside, the camp began to move with urgent purpose. Families were gathering belongings, preparing to disappear into the night. Warriors were checking weapons, horses being readied. Hollis stood at the shelter's entrance, watching the organized chaos, and wondered if any of them would survive long enough to deliver the truth. And if anyone would care, even if they did. They rode through darkness, guided only by moonlight and Nahal's knowledge of terrain most men couldn't navigate in full daylight. There were 6 riders in total, Nahal leading. followed by Yaji and Nijoni sharing a horse. 2 warriors named Takoda and Kurik flanked them, and Hollis brought up the rear on his own horse. The horse that had been returned to him before they departed, the same horse he'd given away, the choice that started everything. They traveled in silence, pushing the horses as hard as they dared without risking injury. Behind them, the camp scattered like seeds on the wind, families disappearing into the landscape, making themselves invisible. Hollis wondered how many would survive if this plan failed. The contract remained tucked inside Nahal's shirt, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the elements. That single piece of paper carried more weight than gold. It was evidence, proof, the difference between justice and massacre. Dawn broke cold and gray. They'd covered significant distance, but not enough. Takoda, scouting ahead, returned with news that tightened everyone's spines. Riders, 8, maybe 10, moving fast. They're tracking us. Nahal's jaw tightened. How far? An hour behind, maybe less if they don't stop. The group exchanged glances. Nijoni's face had gone pale. Her injured leg clearly caused her pain despite the bandages. Yaji's hand moved the rifle strapped to her saddle. The warriors checked their weapons without speaking. Hollis calculated distances in his head. 2 days' ride to the marshal. They'd covered maybe a third of that. If pursuers caught them now, outnumbered and in open territory, the contract wouldn't matter. None of them would survive to deliver it. We need to buy time, Nahal said, his voice cutting through the tension. Split up, make them choose. Yaji shook her head immediately. Father, no, not negotiable. Nahal's tone left no room for argument. Takoda, Kurik, you take my daughters north. Follow the river route. Safer, but longer. The rancher and I go east. Draw the pursuit. Hollis understood instantly. The contract was with Nahal. If the pursuers wanted it badly enough, they'd follow whoever they thought had it, and Nahal wouldn't trust anyone else to carry something that important. They'll know you have it, Hollis said quietly. They'll come at you with everything. Nahal met his eyes. Yes. Which is why I need someone who can shoot straight and won't run when things turn bad. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of trust that Hollis hadn't expected, but found himself accepting without hesitation. The group split within minutes. Takoda and Kurik rode north of the sisters, Nijoni casting one last look back before they disappeared into a canyon passage. Nahal and Hollis turned east toward rougher terrain, and the pursuers behind them. They rode hard for another hour before Nahal signaled to stop. They'd reached a narrow passage between 2 rock formations, defensible with high ground on both sides, but with limited escape routes. Here, Nahal said, dismounting. We make our stand. Hollis slid from his horse, legs protesting after hours of riding. We can't hold them off forever. Don't need forever, just long enough for my daughters to get clear. Nahal pulled the contract from his shirt, looking at it for a long moment. Then he handed it to Hollis. If something happens to me, nothing's happening to you, Nahal continued firmly. If something happens, you get this to Marshal Garrett. Town called Redemption, 2 days northeast from here. You tell him everything. Make him listen. Hollis took the contract, the weight of it settling in his hands like a burden he hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. Why trust me with this? Nahal's expression softened slightly. You gave my daughters your last horse. You could have kept it. Save yourself. Let them die. Instead, you chose their lives over your own survival. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Before Hollis could respond, the sound of approaching riders echoed through the passage. Too many horses. Too close. They took positions on opposite sides of the passage, using rocks for cover. Hollis checked his rifle. 8 rounds left. He'd need to make every shot count. The riders appeared at the passage entrance. Not 8 or 10, 15. More had joined the pursuit. The bearded man led them, his face twisted with determination. He spotted Nahal and Hollis immediately. His voice carried across the distance, sharp and unforgiving. This is your last chance. Give us the contract, and you can walk away. Nahal stood, exposing himself fully. Come take it. The response was immediate. Rifles raised. Hollis saw it happening. He saw the bearded man's hand drop, saw fingers tighten on triggers. Time fractured into individual moments. Hollis fired first, dropping the nearest rider. Nahal's shot followed, precise and deadly, but there were too many. Return fire exploded around them, bullets ricocheting off rock, kicking up dirt and stone fragments. Hollis ducked behind cover, reloading with shaking hands. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't like the camp. There was no reinforcement coming, no warriors to even the odds. Just 2 men against 15. A bullet struck near his head, close enough that he felt a displacement of air. He returned fire blindly, forcing the attackers to take cover. Across the passage, Nahal fought with calm efficiency, each shot deliberate. But even he couldn't hold out forever. The bearded man called out again, his voice thick with frustration. "You're dying for nothing. That contract won't change anything." Hollis presses back against the stone, breathing hard. The contract was pressed against his chest, safely tucked away. He met Nahal's eyes across the passage. The older man nodded once, a gesture of understanding, of acceptance. They were going to die here, but the contract would survive. The truth would survive. And sometimes that was enough. Hollis raised his rifle, ready for whatever came next. The sound of gunfire from behind the attackers changed everything. Hollis looked up from his cover, confusion mixing with desperate hope. The bearded man's group spun around, caught between two forces. New riders poured into the passage, a dozen men in federal uniforms, led by a man wearing a marshal's badge that caught the morning light. Marshal Garrett had found them first. The bearded man's crew scattered immediately, but there was nowhere to run. The passage offered no escape routes. Within minutes, federal officers had surrounded the remaining attackers, weapons drawn, orders shouted with the authority of law behind them. Hollis lowered his rifle, his legs shaking so badly he had to lean against the rock to stay upright. Across the passage, Nahal emerged from cover, blood on his sleeve, but still standing. Marshal Garrett dismounted, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the scene. He was older than Hollis expected, with gray hair, deep lines around sharp eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. He approached Nahal first, recognition clear between them. "Got word you were heading my direction," Garrett said. "Figured if you were making a run for me specifically. The situation was bad. Worse than bad." Nahal's response was quiet but steady. "We have evidence of a government conspiracy to seize tribal lands through manufactured violence." Garrett's expression hardened. He looked at his men securing the prisoners, then back to Nahal. "Show me." Hollis pulled the contract from inside his shirt, his hands still trembling from adrenaline. He handed it to the marshal without a word. Garrett unfolded it carefully, reading in silence. With each line, his face grew darker. When he reached the signatures at the bottom, he swore under his breath, a short, vicious curse that carried more weight than anger. "These are federal officials, appointed men," he said, looking at Nahal. "You understand what this means? The investigation this will trigger? I understand it means families won't be slaughtered for profit." Nahal's voice was firm. "That's enough." Garrett nodded slowly. He turned to Hollis, studying him with the same sharp assessment. "And you are?" "The rancher who gave his horse away and got pulled into all this." Hollis's voice came out more bitter than he intended. Something shifted in Garrett's expression, not quite sympathy, but understanding. "The report mentioned a white man who helped Nahal's daughters escape, said you gave them your last means of transportation, knowing it would cost you everything." Hollis said nothing. What was there to say? Garrett folded the contract carefully, tucking it into his coat. This evidence will be heard in a proper court with proper witnesses. The men who planned this will answer for it. He gestured to the captured bearded man, now being bound by federal officers, including your friends here, who thought intimidation and murder were acceptable tools. The bearded man's face was ashen. Whatever authority he thought he possessed had evaporated the moment federal law arrived. He'd gone from hunter to prey in seconds. Over the next hour, Garrett's men secured the prisoners and took statements. Takoda and Kurik arrived with Yaji and Nijoni, having circled back when they heard the gunfire stop. The reunion between Nahal and his daughters was quiet but profound. Hands clasped, foreheads touching, words spoken too softly for others to hear. Yaji approached Hollis while her father spoke with the marshal. Her expression was different now, softer. The suspicion that had marked their first interactions had transformed into something else. "My father wants you to come back with us to the new camp, wherever we settle." Hollis looked at her, surprised. "I'm not. I don't belong with your people. You gave us your last horse." Yaji's voice was steady. "That makes you kin. Father's words, not mine, but I agree with them." She paused. "You have nowhere else to go. Your ranch is gone. You're wanted by the same people who wanted us dead. Coming with us isn't charity. It's family taking care of family." The word stuck in Hollis's throat. Family. He'd been alone for so long. He'd forgotten what that felt like. Nahal joined them, his wounded arm now bandaged. He extended his hand, not a handshake, but a clasp of forearms, warrior to warrior. "You gave my daughters your last horse when you had every reason not to. You stood beside me when you could have run. You protected what mattered when it would have been easier to let it burn." His grip tightened. "That debt can't be repaid, but it can be honored. You have a place with us for as long as you want it." Hollis felt something break loose in his chest, a knot he'd carried since his wife died, since the drought took everything, since he stopped believing in anything beyond survival. "I'd be honored," he managed. Marshal Garrett approached. "The contract secure in his possession. This will take time, investigations, trials, appeals, but justice will be served. You have my word." He looked directly at Hollis. "What you did, giving up everything for strangers, that took courage most men don't have. The territory needs more people like you." 3 weeks later, Hollis helped construct a shelter in a new camp, located on protected land far from the conspiracy's reach. His hands, calloused from years of ranch work, adapted easily to different construction methods. Children ran past, laughing. Elders shared stories by fires. Life continued, resilient and unbroken. Yaji brought him food as the sun set, sitting beside him in comfortable silence. Nijoni's leg had healed. The trials had begun in distant courts. The contract's evidence had proven irrefutable. And every evening, Hollis, he would often wander over the stables where the horses were kept, always seeking out the one he'd once given away and then received back. He'd gently run his hand along its neck, the familiar touch bringing back the memory of that pivotal choice that had irrevocably altered the course of his life. He remembered handing over his very last horse to 2 Apache sisters as the sun dipped below the horizon. Then, as dawn broke, their father arrived with 200 warriors at his side. And in that moment, Hollis Vane rediscovered something he believed lost him forever. A purpose to persevere, a place where he truly belonged. He found a family that had chosen him just as deliberately and wholeheartedly as he had chosen them. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes the things you willingly relinquish return to you, transformed into precisely what you needed all along. If you found this story engaging, click the video currently on your screen to watch another unforgettable tale from the American frontier, where honor and courage clash in unexpected and compelling ways. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, and if you're able, consider sending a super chat. Your support allows us to continue creating and sharing more stories like this one. Your support truly means the world to us.